What is up, you guys? I decided to bring Kama's podcast back in a raw, unfiltered way. I know you guys are used to super polished, having intro music, all the things, the guests, but Kama's has been around for almost, I guess, 4 years in and out. We haven't been consistent, but when we do drop those gems. So I asked you guys on my Instagram in my group if you guys wanted me to bring the Commas podcast back and talk about my current journey with Frame Me, which is my company. I have another company that we are building, me and my co-founder, Leif Taylor. And you guys said yes. And there's so many things I want to talk about, like from how the business got started, what's it like raising capital in Atlanta versus San Francisco, New York, and LA, my trip out to LA to meet with investors, because Framey is a content creation platform powered by AI. So I have to be mobile and talking to people, right? It's not just sitting in the house and hoping for the best. Understanding the landscape. When Framey started, everybody thought it was a service-based business. It was, in a sense, the way it was structured, and how we pivoted to a SaaS business and why we pivoted to a SaaS business, and the different verticals of things we built out, why nobody likes marketplaces in terms of investors and why they're just not excited about them if that's the type of capital you're going after, and the types of different capital, right? Because the focus is on like the 2%. You guys have all heard the stats, the 2% of Black and brown founders who get venture capital. Well, there's other vehicles. There's angel investors, loans, grants. There's a bunch of conversations around CDFIs right now. I just had a conversation with Atlanta Constitutional Journal around getting more capital into those places. So there's just so many things, down to doing your books and accounting and like what you should be looking at and how you should be doing those, so that when you go into due diligence, if you do decide to pursue venture capital, what that looks like, what you should do if you have a traditional service-based business, and what it looks like to apply for a traditional loan, because those are very different conversations when you're opening up your business checking account and what nobody tells you in terms of how to structure it properly. If you do have a marketplace, what does GMV mean versus take rate, and why you can't present that to investors and why they won't get upset with you? So much stuff, you guys. I have so many things to talk to you guys about: how to get your company off the ground, building that minimum viable product or like scale back version so people get excited about it. It's just topic after topic after topic. So I'm gonna try to streamline it and keep it to one topic per episode so that it doesn't get overwhelming. But my brain has an insane amount of information just because of the journey that me and Leif have been on with Frame Me, and I want to give it to you guys. I'm gonna give it to you raw. I'm gonna give it to you unfiltered. And yeah, so let's get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Frame even came into fruition. I was not in the market to be starting another company. Definitely didn't think it was going to be a venture backed company. I definitely thought we were going to bootstrap it, and things turned very quickly. I was working at Truist last year. Truist is a super regional bank. It's one of the largest banks in the Southeast, if not the biggest. I was working there as a vice president of innovation when it came to content and creation around innovation. And one day, they laid off the entire department. So that ended very quickly. It was a very interesting job. I had two roles that was kind of split between what I was doing in technology as far as startups and helping them on that side with basically what's called corporate venture. And the way corporate venture works is they look for startups that they can bring into the organization that can pilot companies and basically help to see where those companies could help grow the corporation, right? So we were in the process of looking at that. And then also on the content creation side, my career has been both. So they're like, okay, well, we can utilize you over here too. So what type of content do you want to help drive the brand strategy, the story? So my role said innovation strategy, but it was kind of a creative role slash venture role. It was kind of a hodgepodge of all of them. Anyway, so fast forward, the whole situation came to a halt when they decided that they were going to basically not move forward with that organization. And I said, okay, I've never been the person that wants to be in a corporation or a job. Like, I've always been an entrepreneur. I had my first company, Hidden Experience Productions, when I was like 18 years old. It was a production company that I created, basically to run my music videos through. I used to shoot commercials and music videos, and I just didn't know how to build a business, right? So I was a creative trying to be in the business spirit, the business mindset, and it just wasn't happening the way that I needed it to happen. So I ended up signing to a production company, Rock Hard Films, which is based out of LA. They had Ray K, who was my mentor at the time, who was directing some of the biggest videos in the industry, for Beyonce to Lady Gaga, Poker Face, Justin Bieber. He did all of Justin Bieber's early videos. So I ended up signing to their production company, and that's why my production company just did not sustain. But I did run some jobs through it. So I've always been the person that, like, okay, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. I just never knew, like, no one ever showed me, hey, this is how you do the thing, right? And I think that's so interesting because I went through this program called Draper University, which essentially was, the question was from Tim Draper. Tim Draper, if you guys are not familiar, his great grandfather started venture capital in Silicon Valley. So his family is a dynasty, like 4 generations of venture capitalists, like 3 generations. I'm not sure which generation they're on now, but started venture capital in the Valley. And I ended up later in my career going through his program. And the question was, can entrepreneurship be taught? And at the time, because of the way the program is structured, I felt like, no, like, it has to be ingrained in you. You have to have that thirst, that hunger, that drive. And now that I've gone through my phase of entrepreneurship, I went through that program in 2013. Now that I've gone through my phase of entrepreneurship, I'm like, yeah, you absolutely can teach entrepreneurship, and you need the skill sets to do it, right? So fast forward to today, I basically said, well, a couple months ago, we started framing in January of this year, but I said, hey, I'm not going back to corporate. Like, I'm going to go ahead and go and dive all in into a new venture. And that's where Frame came into fruition. So I was in Silicon Valley. I was coaching their entrepreneurs at Draper University, and I was talking to them and had this idea of, like, hey, I need a videographer, and I get so frustrated when I can't find one. I just want to book a videographer, right? And it was so irritating. I'm like, do I go to Craigslist to do this? Like, where do I go? And I actually had used another platform called Snapper. So Snapper was, at the time, book a photographer on demand, and I actually really liked them. I had great shoots. I would, book them if I was out of town. I shot with them when I was in Atlanta doing, I think I had a bowling party, and they covered it. And I was like, all right, I like this idea. Let's see if they've gone into videography yet. And I logged onto their platform, and they had it at the time. And since they have, and they're doing great, I assume, I don't know. I don't have any insight into their company, but I said, let me think about this. Let me figure out how I could potentially create a business around booking videographers on demand. Now, again, because I had been in corporate, I knew AI was coming into fruition, but I didn't know how strongly it was coming into fruition. And I didn't know how, like, I hadn't been in the venture market in terms of fundraising in almost 10 years. So even though I was coaching entrepreneurs and I understood the businesses that they were growing, I just knew that this idea was interesting to me and it was something I wanted to pursue. I didn't know the viability of it in today's market, right? And I learned that very, very quickly. And we'll get into that in some later episodes. But so fast forward, I reached out to a friend of mine who I had known from Draper. We both had venture backed startups in 2013. He had a Bitcoin startup focused on the blockchain. And I said, hey, I have this idea. Is it something interesting to you? I think it could be $1 billion idea. And he was like, actually, that's really interesting to me. I said, I'll talk to you about it when I get back to Atlanta, because I live in Atlanta now. I left LA in 2021, the end of 2021. I said, I'll talk to you about it when I get back to Atlanta. And so I flew from the Bay Area, from Silicon Valley, back to Atlanta. And I said, hey, let's have this conversation. Like, this is what I'm thinking. I think it'll be super dope. I don't want to deal with venture capital because I had had my fair share of bumps and bruises the first startup go around. Even though I had raised capital, it still was not an easy plight by any means. And I said, I don't want to raise venture. Let's focus on just building the business, right? And as I started to understand the market size, because venture is all about market size and how big the business can be and what the viability of the business is in terms of how much traction you can get, and just like what could this business potentially be, right? In Silicon Valley, they call them unicorn companies or like billion-dollar companies. Could this business get to a billion-dollar exit or liquidity? So as I was thinking about it, I said yes. Like I really do think that this could get there. And now at that time, we also were focused on the creator. We are not anymore. We're focused on the small, medium business owner as our ICP, so our initial customer profile, which we can dive into that a little bit. Basically, it's who you're focusing on, your what they call beachhead. Like you have one focus, one focal point before you scale the business or before you grow out to other customer segments. So right now our ICP is a small, medium business owner, and we just figured that out. Okay. Before we were all about the creator because that is where my world was and that was my focus. So, by way of being all about the creator, the question was, can this business be big enough? Is it going to be able to scale? Right. And that was a lot of the questions that we started getting as we started pitching venture capitalists. And again, I'll get into those in later episodes and like the real knit and grit of what that looks like. But I said, hey, you know what? I went back to my co founder. I said, let's actually approach this from a venture scalable model. Like, let's look at this from a venture standpoint, and we weren't thinking about AI. It wasn't even in the conversation. And eventually it became a part of the conversation, a massive part of the conversation. And so, because now we were focused on it, we said, okay, let's double down on really understanding what needs to happen with Frame Me versus what it would have looked like if we stayed as a LLC or a small medium business ourselves. And we could have easily done that. We could have booked videographers as a service-based business and called it a day. There didn't need to be any technology around it. But honestly, I think from a venture standpoint, I can safely say this because of the way venture capital businesses are structured, they're not human intensive for the most part. There's not a lot of, especially today, they want software. Your software needs to be your moat, or your tech needs to be your moat. So that needs to be driving the business. And most of the time when you're doing that, you have infrastructure around that tech, which is systems that also drive the business, right? So you're not doing a whole, you aren't working in the business. You're working, you're pushing the raise of capital, or you're doing things to help the business grow, but you're not physically working on the business as you start to scale. In the beginning, you are, because you're trying to understand the business model. You're trying to understand if it's a viable business, will customers pay for this business? So you actually do need to be in the trenches. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's very strange how they describe it to you, but you do need to be in the trenches to understand how to actually figure out what the business is, right? And then once you understand that, then you could put the proper systems into place, the proper people into place in order to remove yourself pretty much as a CEO from the business and have the business do its own thing by itself, if that makes sense. So, as we were going through that process, we said, hey, we do believe that we can actually make this a viable business. The issue is, as we started to talk to venture capitalists, they were like, well, we kind of see this as a service-based business because we hadn't fully baked out the rest of the technology in the business yet. And because Framey started making money pretty much by the time we got into building the minimum viable product, or like a very scaled back version or baby version of Framey, it was making money by month 3. And the way we acquired that first customer was just pretty much talking to people and saying, "Hey, this is what we're doing. Is this something that's interesting to you?" And of course, a lot of people are creating content for their businesses. So yeah, we acquired our first customer pretty quickly, right? Because we had traction around that first customer and didn't have the technology fully baked around the business yet. When we pitched venture capitalists, they were like, "Hey, we see this as a marketplace, or even worse, in the VC world, we see this as a service-based business, right? So by way of it being a service-based business, we don't want anything to do with it because we don't like service-based businesses because they don't scale. And that's true because you're working in the business. So when we say service-based business, we think about, like, let's just say you had 100, videographers, and that's all you did was just send videographers out. Okay, service. I'm servicing you, right? There's no technology around it. There's no moat. It's just me saying, "Hey, Johnny, go out and shoot this. Have a good day." Right? Johnny comes back. The the job is done, done and done, service-based business. So that is what made it super unsexy to VCs. And they're like, okay, now we can see it as a marketplace, like basically where somebody purchases on one side and then there's a supply and demand. So there's a supply from the purchaser, or sorry, there's a supply from the videographer, and then there's a demand from the purchaser or the client. So we can see that, but we don't really like that either. Like, we want a business where basically it's just nonstop tech, right? People are just coming, they're using the product. We don't even care about the word service. They're using the product, and they're excited about the product, and then that's how you'll scale. So we went through a very, very, very hard time for the first. After that, even though we were generating revenue, it was insanely difficult to basically bootstrap. One, because I was living off of a severance from Truist, and two, because it's not enough revenue to sustain your livelihood. And I think that's something that people don't talk about. It's like, oh, is the business making money? Yes. Okay. But I still need to live, right? And then you go to a VC and they're like, yeah, but we want you to work on the business full time. You're like, cool. So can you invest in the business so I can do that? And they're like, no, you're going to have to show us some traction and get in alignment with where we're at before we want to make that decision. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So it was just a really, and still is, not was, it still is a really difficult uphill battle. And I will say we have come to a great space in terms of how the business is structured and the business model today. But it took 6 to 7, what are we month? Shoot, it's August. The whole year is almost gone, you guys. It took almost 8 months, 8 months to do that. And we're still figuring it out, right? So I think that's one thing that I can definitely anchor in on is like the metric that VCs look at in terms of making sure your business is viable to them. And that's something that I guess even though I was in Silicon Valley and fully understood like how to evaluate a tech business, I wasn't thinking about it when it came to Frame Me, because I was so heavily in the trenches and because I had seen my business model before. I saw it in Snapper. So why would you guys question it, right? Like, I've seen this model, but Snapper was also founded in 2017 and it wasn't sexy to what the market feels like is going to move in terms of technology today, right? Which is, of course, AI. So we do have a massive AI integration into the business. AI actually powers our entire business now, aside from the videographer, right? Because we had to either, get in where we fit in, or what is it? I can't even remember the saying right now, but we had to do the thing. So we did. So it actually is great because I love using AI with being a creator. I think it's really cool, all the things that you can do. And so it didn't hurt the business or hurt me from a vision perspective, but it did cause us to have to make some rapid adjustments because we were getting turned down by VCs nonstop. I'm talking about, I have a network. I was in venture capital. I have invested in businesses, and I was still getting turned down. I wasn't even turned down to the fact of like, hey, here's some feedback, like try these things, but like, no, right? And those no's kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier as the money started running out. And so, yeah, that is where we are, just from an overview, but there's so many details, you guys. There's so much more I want to unravel with you and just help you understand, no matter what type of business you're trying to build, because we are going through it. We've been through it. We've seen it. And as much as we can help you prevent those hurdles, we will. Framey is a super dope business. We're watching so many people create dope content so they can drive traffic to generate revenue for their businesses. And that is the vision of the business. But to get it to that vision was a task and a half. Okay. And we needed a support system to do that. So Thank you guys. I'm gonna wrap this one up, but make sure you tune in. I don't have a schedule as to when I'm going to drop them. I'm just going to drop them at will. So make sure you subscribe so they'll alert you on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, so you know when they come out. But yeah, I've got so much to say and I will keep saying it. So stay tuned.